Hello friends, and thank you all so much for joining me again here today. Of course, I'm going to be chilling out here for a minute as I get some folks coming up on here, and I can see that folks are coming in. I apologize for missing last week. I just haven't been able to, I've been brooding on some ideas, and I haven't really been able to feel really confident in just jumping on and talking about them. And in the midst of that, I also had a whole weekend out of town trip that came up, and frankly, it's pretty freaking hot outside. It's actually not as hot as it can be this time of year, but it's extremely humid, and so that's taking a lot out of me when I go out to work out at the farm or in my gardens each day. And so, but today I really wanted to spend some time talking about something that I find myself using, a term that I find myself using quite a bit. It is not something that I necessarily made up myself. I actually wanted to kind of start out with that because I think that in itself is a good story that helps to define what the term path of least resistance means to me. I actually came across that term for the very first time after listening to Abraham Hicks over the years. In speaking with Law of Attraction, she often would use the term path of least resistance. And that term seems to be coming up a lot more and more as more folks are beginning to understand conscious creation and understanding that there's a lot about energy that we haven't really understood before now, and physical matter. And so those types of things this term is floating around in the world a lot. Like another term that I would say that you're hearing a lot of lately is the term triggered. I feel triggered. I'm being triggered. And what's triggering me? So there's certain terms that are coming up, and this particular path of least resistance was something that I feel like the reason why all of a sudden it became something that became more able to resonate and be understood by me is because a path of least resistance has been created for the term to resonate for more people. There are more people within the mainstream understanding what the path of least resistance means, so that means that it's going to be used more often. So the path of least resistance, starting out to kind of define that term, could very well be simply the idea that all of a sudden, from places all over the world, that a term or a word or a new idea or an invention of some kind or some sort of new innovation all is happening at the same time. And we find it odd because it never really connected and hadn't had a chance to connect. But what happens in energy, and I'm going to talk about that concept of matter again, and that basically what matters is what we see, because energy has formed in a space it has come together, and we're all seeing the same thing, and we are consciously creating green grass and red hair and those types of things. But those things are created through the path of least resistance. That is literally how they form. And if you think about the idea that all of a sudden, all over the planet, there were people that were all studying flight, and there were different people that were inventing flight, the flight pattern, how to fly, the first planes, all of those things were all kind of happening at the same time. The same thing with electricity. It was kind of happening at the same time, and then there's, concepts of who actually invented it and who was the real inventor. But the fact of the matter is that the way consciousness works is we have paths of least resistance. And once any human being within this conscious creative mainstream that we've all begun to work in begins thinking about something, it starts a path of least resistance, which means the hard matter that makes something else has a path of least resistance to become matter, and the idea then comes out. So just the concept of beginning to understand what path of least resistance mean. That was a good story to say it, because before too long, that term, just like triggering, will become a part of the mainstream because it had enough people communicating it that it has created at that point a path of least resistance. It can form and create because it's been being created by a lot more people all at the same time. And if you take that concept of path of least resistance, let's take the concept into wellness, disease, the way that our body forms and things like that. So over ancestral history or just family genetics, DNA, all of these like thought processes that we've created within our family tree, if we've created a certain type of we're all going to have red hair, it's going to be easier for our DNA to align with red hair because all of the strands of DNA are there to help that occur. But we've also helped to create it by saying, by having centuries of people that are seeing people within their family tree with red hair. The same thing also happens when we're dealing with like weight and our bodies and things like that. What we see on a regular basis is what we expect to see when we go and look at that thing. So the path of least resistance for our body to go back to exactly what it knows. So if we're talking about like weight loss and dieting and things like that, it's very, very easy for our body to go back to what it knows, to fall back into the pattern that it has already created, because there's a path of least resistance there. Our body already knows what that feels like. It already knows what that looks like. And so it's easy, maybe our moms are like that or our dads are like that. So it's really easy for us to consciously create that path because that path is of least resistance. Now, what happens sometimes, I think, with path of least resistance is it's not necessarily what we want. And so that's where you get into this concept where people are saying, well, take the road less traveled, or he takes the easy way out. Because the path of least resistance is most often the easiest way for matter, idea, consciousness, thought to create itself. And so once it's created this path that makes it easy for us to understand how it is created, then we can go back to creating more and more of that over and over again. And as a consciousness, it's just generally easier. It's easier for us to create things when we've got people or creatives out there that are already helping to lead with paths of least resistance. It's also a concept of evidence, right? I have seen someone else do it. That creates a path of least resistance for me to imagine that I have the possibility to do something like that. Because if they can do it, why can't I do it, right? But if you go back to the concept of the path of least resistance versus the road less traveled, sometimes the easy way, the path of least resistance, isn't necessarily what we actually want. It's just the path of least resistance. It's the way we know how to go. So every single day, we go to work the exact same way. We take the path of least resistance and we get there quickly. But what if that's not exactly the way we want to go, and we then have to shift our conscious, our unconscious mind that generally will just drive and go and get where it needs to go, to say, okay, I want to go on a different path because I want to make sure that I'm driving along the bay and looking at the water and seeing the sun sparkle off the water, because that makes my day feel better. And that isn't necessarily the path of least resistance. It's actually more of the road less traveled, but that's the one that makes me feel best. And the road less traveled sometimes takes longer, is harder, has more bumps, has more red lights, you have to drive slower, whatever it is. But we've created, that would be the road less traveled, that has some more bumps and bruises, is a little bit harder to get around, that kind of thing. It's harder rather than easier. And when we're talking about matter, and that's the whole point of this concept of creating this understanding of path of least resistance, is that we're talking about the path of least resistance that energy creates in order to make matter. How quickly can that matter be created? And if something is hard or more challenging, then its path isn't as, it has more friction. There's more friction on that energy's path to creating matter. So then we get into this concept of, okay, well, if we want to create a change, if we want to create a new path of least resistance, then what are the things that we have to look into in order to do that? Why is it that we've created inside of our mind that it's really hard to create that thing? That might be one of the roads less traveled that we have begun to look at and thought, okay, well, I want to have something different, but I'm going to have to take the road less traveled in order to have that. So it's not necessarily the easiest path, but it can be if you begin to look for opportunities to find out who else has done this stuff. How can I create space for this thing that I know is possible because I've seen someone else doing it? And then once you create space for the energy to come in, it has a better path of least resistance. It doesn't have as much friction. So, you can go back to all of the work and different types of things that we do on a regular basis, and we're going to go, okay, well, what's the path of least resistance to get my kids out of bed, dressed for school, to get to work on time, all of those types of things. And what happens, similar to even that concept of like diet and stuff like that, is that we fall very easily into the path of least resistance because it's what we know. But the reason I bring this up is because I've been using this term a lot to explain why things are happening sometimes to some people that are not happening to other people, in a good way and a bad way. It's because there are paths of least resistance there that make it easy for that to form, for that matter to create, for that idea to come into more brains, therefore to innovate and invent and to create these new concepts. And it also helps us to release the concept of oh, they stole my idea. It's not about that. It's about the idea, the creative path is going to create itself, whether you're there to receive it, whether you're there to collect it, whether you're there to put some momentum on it and create the idea and be a part of it or not. But that idea, if the consciousness wants to create that idea, then it is going to find the path of least resistance. It's going to look around the whole universe of everything that ever exists and find its paths of least resistance. So that's why in some places, like, some people are going to be constantly dealing with disease, and some people are going to be constantly healthy, while this person over here and this person over here, maybe this person over here eats really well and this person over here doesn't eat really well, or something like that. But this person over here is dealing with a constant stream of bombarding trauma and drama and all of those things. And this person over here just kind of lives a joyful life where they just love what they eat and, all of that kind of stuff. And what happens is that this creates the path of least resistance to dis-ease over here, because you've created places and spaces for those viruses and bacterias and just the angst and the anxiety and all those things to fill up the spaces and to form and to create something. Whereas over here, this person is just like, you know what? I love food. Food is delicious. I don't think poorly about it at all. I just enjoy my life and I live that way. And so when you think about things in that way, then you start to be able to gear your paths of least resistance to the things that you actually desire, rather than creating paths of least resistance to the things that you don't desire. And so if you hear me, if I comment on a post or something and use the term path of, you have created a path of least resistance, it means that there are indicators in your life that are showing signs that you are giving space, you are making plenty of room for that to enter. Whatever it is that aligns with the thing that you either desire and you actually want, or that you're just simply creating space for and now is entering your space and causing you potential challenges. The other part that's actually great about the path of least resistance, as opposed to seeing it as the easy way out, because it's not necessarily, it is the easy way out, but sometimes the easy way out is the best way. It's the good way, because you have, okay, let's talk about money for an example. You have created a a bunch of streams of passive income, and you have made it easy. You have created a path of least resistance for money to enter your life. Whether you're working nonstop all the time, or whether you're vacationing and spending time with your children and working in your gardens, or whatever it is you're doing, if you've created these paths of least resistance within your money life, your wealth, your health, your all of these different things, then you can find easier paths to get the things that you desire. And so these are some of the things that I've begun learning and I've been really, really thinking about. And, you know, like I said, I always heard Abraham Hicks use that term, but it never quite resonated with me the same as when I began to understand. And I talk a few of my Aislynn's World episodes back, maybe 1 or 2 back. You can find them on YouTube if you're interested in looking for that. And it talks about creating space for things. And what are you creating space for? And so when you begin to understand path of least resistance, it helps you to begin to then think about, well, how does matter form? Okay, and if matter forms in this way and I need to create space for the things I want, then the path of least resistance is how easy can it create? How easy can it grow? Clay. Because I like to use garden as an example for almost everything because it's the way my mind thinks and it helps me out. But clay soil is hard, and it's going to get it gets really, really hard after lots and lots of rain, and then no rain, and sun sets it in, a hard, hot sun turns it into hard clay, almost like a concrete type of situation. Well, when the rain comes in and you can go out there and weed very quickly, you have created paths of least resistance in this hard situation. The water, the moisture has created paths of least resistance that makes it easier to just pull something out. It also makes it easier to just push something in, right? So it's not any different. It's how matter forms. It's all energy. It's all life. It's all decomposed matter that is now formed into a different form of matter. And now I'm going in and participating in it, or activating, or changing it, or touching it, or moving it, or shifting it, or whatever, and creating and doing that by using the paths of least resistance. Because I could go back and do the exact same thing, but I might have to use a tractor to do it. I might have to use more force in order to get what I want. I might have to use more of that, shall we call it, masculine power, rather than my more feminine, I've created, I'm using these paths. I'm using these least resistance. I'm not using force, right? And there's a huge part of where we are in creative consciousness. Of course, paths of least resistance is making more sense to more people because we are beginning to understand our ability to consciously create with both masculine and feminine. We can create with force. We can make it happen. We can work really hard and we can make it happen. Or we can open up space and create paths of least resistance for the things we desire to align with us, to come to us, to be a part of us. And that's what path of least resistance means to me. And it's been fun to kind of hear some of these terms that have been going, that I've been hearing, that have been going off in my mind, that have been going off in different spaces of different folks talking about how we are learning so much about the fifth dimension and this movement towards creative consciousness and harmony. But in the midst of that, we're also dealing with all of this other really, really hard and challenging stuff. But each one of those hard and challenging things that we're willing as human beings, whether it's with our own self and our own self-worth and work and all of those types of things that we're working on, to quiet ourselves down and to allow those paths of least resistance to align with us, or we can do it the hard way. We can push through in a more in a lower dimensional space that is hard and challenging and war and battle, or we can say, okay, well, I can see that there's some pain, there's some disease, and it's not just me, it's everyone. It's everyone is dealing with the same type of stuff. Okay, so what are the paths of least resistance, the easier ways for us as human consciousness to move through this time that is so interesting and challenging and all of those types of things? And some of the ways of paths of least resistance for me, especially in the beginning, were gardening and fresh vegetables and drinking delicious beverages that I love and getting my hair done. The little things that give me opportunity to access these paths of least resistance to the things that I desire, with just little notes of what I want, notes of what I desire. And then beginning to look around and going, oh yeah, it's kind of all right here. It's kind of forming. And sometimes it forms with such great ease that you almost don't even notice that it's formed all around you, especially if you're only expecting things to come through hard work. Because if you look around, there's probably things, exactly the types of things that you desired with the paths of least resistance that you created all around you, because they just aligned. And for me, one of the greatest modalities that I've learned is to sit quietly. Be quiet in my mind, giving my mind some space, to allow my source, God, to give me some paths of least resistance. Sometimes I go and ask for them. What is the path of least resistance here? Help me see the path of least resistance. And back in the old days, I used to use a term, I would say 15 or 20 years ago, when I was talking to people about how I make decisions about my life and how I move forward with my life, even if I'm, fearful or, whatever, is that I would always say that I look for the next stepping stone to light up. I'm going to take a step forward, but I'm looking for the stone to light up. And when I see the stone to light up, that's when I move. And I move really fast. And that's a very similar concept to the path of least resistance. But now I can ask for it in any situation, and it is making my life a hell of a lot easier and a hell of a lot more fun and enjoyable. And it's beautiful, and I love it, and it feels peaceful, and it feels calm, and I feel like there's a lot more people that are being inspired by it and feeling it with me, and it's an exciting time. And so I love you all. I'm excited to get the chance to just jump back on and talk to you guys again today. I think this concept of path of least resistance is something that maybe if you have a real interest in kind of figuring out what that term might mean to you, journal it out, write it down, take notes of a few of the things that I said today, take a few little notes of words that resonated with you, clicked with you, and journal about them. What is it that I want, and what would be, not how do I get there, because how is not your job, but what do I want? What do I want to be? And who am I that would receive that particular thing? What would it feel like if I received that particular thing, or that particular idea, or that solution to the problem? Because this is all about manifestation. It is. But it doesn't necessarily have to be about manifesting things. It can simply be about manifesting change. It can simply be about manifesting new ideas, new creative solutions to problems. And right now, in this world, we are looking for a lot of creative solutions to some really challenging problems. So opening up space for the path of least resistance to exist in your life is very valuable. But at the same time, recognizing what do you want, and when is there an opportunity, just like it's just as great to be easy and to flow easily, when is there an opportunity to take the road less traveled and to sludge through a little bit so that I can get something different than what I had before that I didn't really like? And why was I holding on to it? And we'll talk about that part of it on another day. Why was I holding on to it? Why was I creating that blockage and not allowing the path of least resistance to what I desire to exist? All right. If you're watching this on YouTube, I would love it if you would subscribe. Please like and comment. That means a lot to me. I'm learning more about responding back to people and talking to more people online and things like that. So if you would please subscribe, like, comment. If you're here with me on Facebook, maybe share this with a friend you think that this would resonate with. And please feel free to comment, and I will see you all very soon. I'm sitting in a cocoony type space. I'm being very broody. I'm brooding some egg ideas right now. I've got some eggs that are already burst, but I'm waiting for them to really create what they're wanting to be, and I'm excited to see how that comes out as I move through the summer and I get through a big transitional space for my family as we move and leave the home that we've lived in for the last 7 years. So, I love you guys. I'll see you all very soon.